beautiful time. And when I talk about the Camino now, I talk about there was no way I could have planned that interaction. The funny thing about walking alone on the Camino is you're never alone. If you may choose to be if you want. I personally felt called to go by myself. In fact, my husband offered to go and I told him no. I had never heard about the Camino until about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was a woman who was retiring and told me she was going on this trip across Spain where the best of humanity shows up. And when that happens, many miracles occur. The situation that came to mind was a day that I ended up walking about 10.
Welcome, pilgrims, to the Way to Your Why podcast. Today we have with us Kathy Henrich. What does it really mean to feel called to the Camino? And how do you know when it's time to listen? In today's conversation, we explore that quiet voice, the one that doesn't always promise what we want, but somehow leads us exactly what we need. From letting go of control to discovering presence, joy, and unexpected meaning along the way. This is a story about what happens when we stop trying to plan every step and begin to trust the journey. If you ever felt that pull but couldn't quite explain it, this episode may help you understand why. So welcome, Kathy. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So the first question that I have for you is that call for the Camino, how that happened for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So first of all, I had never heard about the Camino until about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was a woman who was retiring and told me she was going on this trip across Spain. And she told me she was doing it the glamorous way, the glamping way, right? She was doing hotels and having her bag, taken, et cetera. And I thought it sounded very interesting. And I envisioned myself doing it that way, pulling my roller bag and checking into hotels. And it's funny, as I started actually really seriously thinking about it, for some reason, it got simpler and simpler and simpler in my mind. And to the point where I thought, you know what? I can carry my own bag. I can get by with 2 t-shirts for the month. I can manage this on my back. I'll stay in communal living environments. And I am so glad I did it that way because I think my experience would have been very different if I had not. I personally felt called to go by myself. In fact, my husband offered to go and I told him no, because I had a couple of goals in mind for myself that I thought would be just different if I had somebody else go with me. So yes, I did it kind of, I'll call it the old-fashioned way, nothing planned other than the first night hotel, and off I went.
Okay, and for how long did you walk that time?
So I went actually between 2 family weddings. I walked for 27 days. I went 440 miles. I started in Pamplona and went to Santiago de Compostela, averaging about 16 and a half miles a day, is what I did.
Okay. When was that you did the walk?
I went in the fall of 2025.
So last year.
So last year.
Okay. And then, so when you arrived to Pamplona, how was that arriving to Pamplona? What do you feel at the time?
Well, I did a little zigzag. I flew into Madrid and I went to Zaragoza first, which is it's a cathedral there, which is known for the first apparition of Mary to Saint James. And I thought it was a very appropriate place to start because he was praying to Mary at the time for guidance and for confidence in his mission. And I was going for multiple reasons, but one was to pray for the healing of my daughter, who's been ill for many years. And the second was to discern my future. So I did a little zigzag to Zaragoza before I got to the Camino. And so my first night was actually very quick. I didn't get there till almost 7:30 at night. I had to go buy poles, so I went to a sporting goods store, bought poles, and got checked in, and that was it. Slept, and the next morning I literally started walking around trying to figure out where the Camino was, and saw people walking with backpacks and joined in.
Okay. So nice. So that was nice. So and then when you start walking the Camino, and so you start knowing or meeting other people that were going to the Camino, correct?
Yep.
Okay. In the entire Camino from Pamplona to Santiago, uh, do you have any idea how many people do you met?
No, but I did keep track of countries. I kept track of. I met people from over 30 countries.
Okay.
But hundreds of people, right? When you're staying in communal living environments, etc. But what is remarkable is how people continue to pop up throughout the Camino that you thought you had said goodbye to. Now, my trip, because I did it relatively fast, my first 2 weeks, I would meet people, and then I was moving much faster than them. So I would just keep, moving past them. It wasn't really until my second 2 weeks that I would say I met people on a consistent way. So that would keep popping up in just unusual ways.
Okay, that you used to see it every day.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, because you know that when you're on the Camino, you start walking, and usually about the same time that you see them just the day before, you say the next day as well.
Yeah. The funny thing about walking alone on the Camino is you're never alone. If you may choose to be if you want, all right, you can walk alone for periods of time. But if you want conversation at a cafe or in the evening, etc., there's always somebody there.
Okay. Where do you live here in the US? Which state?
I live in Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin. Okay. So then in Wisconsin, so there are a lot of places to do hiking as well?
Yes.
Okay, because in North Carolina, there are a lot. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and
So,
in fact, I live in my training routes. I actually only live about 3 miles from what's called the Ice Age Trail. It's
okay.
also the Wisconsin Way, and I would use that as training routes as I prepared for the Camino.
Okay. And that Wisconsin way that you are talking about, how
Mhm.
long it is?
Oh, I actually don't know exactly. It goes from just outside Green Bay and goes down to Holy Hill, which is about 30 minutes outside Milwaukee.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a beautiful path.
Okay, so it should be. And then, so then that experience of the Camino, and then related that with your day to day. So because you're living in Wisconsin and everybody have their routine, their life. What would you say that was different during that experience at the Camino?
Oh, everything's different, right? It's the simplicity on the Camino is amazing, right? You get up every day, you walk, and when you get there, you basically do three things when you get there: you shower, you wash your clothes, and then you eat and socialize, right? And that simplicity of the same pattern every day is very comforting. And you really have nothing to worry about other than perhaps how you're going to feed yourself that day. But everything else kind of evolves as your day goes. There's not a set agenda, etc., other than getting up and walking.
Okay, yes. And what about the places where you stay? The majority of the places that you stay were albergues or were hotel as well?
I did albergues mostly, but about every 3 nights I would get a hotel so I could get a full night's sleep.
Okay.
It just to keep my health. But some of my favorite memories are obviously from the albergues,
Okay.
not from the hotels.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit about how is the day in an albergue? What when you arrive to the albergue, how that looks like?
They're so different. Each experience was different, right? I stayed in a beautiful place. Oh, now I can't remember the city's name, but it was a former palace and it was converted. And you couldn't predict this stuff. We actually ended up creating a mini singing group in the middle of the albergue as people were coming in, and somebody was playing piano and another person was playing guitar, and those of us were singing. It could be everything from that wonderful experience to I stayed in albergue with only, it was a small one, a small private. There were only 10 beds, I believe, and everything for dinner was homemade from scratch, etc. We shared a beautiful dinner together. And so it can be that, or it can be, much larger environments. There was one that happened to me, my first one, and I'm super glad I had other ones booked, because it was communal living to the maximum. It was more of a wide open locker room style place for you to change and get dressed, etc. And I slept in a bunk room with 20 other people, all of which happened to be guys that evening, with
Okay.
this symphony of snoring going on. But it can be everything. But in each one, I met amazing people from all over the world. One place I stayed, we were doing yoga in the lawn, right? I mean, and just every experience across the sun. It was just beautiful.
Okay. And question for you: what do you do for a living?
So I part of the reason I walked, one was, as I said, for my daughter, but the second one was discern my future, because I had told my board of my intent to retire, in quotes, and I was discerning what that looked like, whether I truly wanted to retire or whether I wanted to continue to be active in some way. Um, Today, I sit on several boards. I sit on both public boards, but also nonprofit boards. And then I help a number of nonprofits who are working to scale their missions, based on my experience. But it was interesting when I came home, somebody asked me if there was any consistency to the people that I had met. And it's funny because she had gone and she had just had stomach cancer and a divorce, and she kept meeting people that had digestive issues or had recently been through a divorce. In my first week, I kept meeting retirees, and that first week, I kind of decided I was not a typical retiree. I was not going to, go and play golf, tennis, etc. And then from there, I kept meeting individuals who had adult children who were either had kind of special needs and had challenges or health issues, or unfortunately had passed away. And so I met a lot of individuals with similar circumstances of adult children who, um, you know, where it was difficult, because of health reasons or whatever. So it was an amazing ability to what I call discern through conversations with others, and figure out what commonalities, where I could really contribute and help others, that had faced similar circumstances to mine.
Okay. Pretty nice cause to do. And based on that experience that you have been having on through the different boards that you have been participating, and here in the US, what kind of situations you can see that, because in my case, for example, in my case, I came from working from different big companies, and I always have noticed that there are a lot of stress at all level of positions. And
Yes.
the great majority, and the funny part, and I see that because before working for Camino Wonders, I used to work in finance. And you know that all the problems that happen in the company go to the collections or accounts receivable department, because it's when the customer have to pay, they don't pay because there are too many issues. So we have to be involved with all executives from the company, especially on the sales side. And I have noticed that most of those times when we have meetings, uh, there were situations that those stress doesn't worth it because the solution was not in any of our hands, the one that we're dealing with. And the situation were already escalated to the appropriate departments. So what we just need to do is just wait for that the person who is expert, for example, when there are quality issues, collections or sales in quality issues cannot do anything. The quality department is the one that need to handle that. Uh, but still, the stress happen. And then in your situation on those boards that you have having, there are no similar problems or in another magnitude.
Well, there's always issues. And so I spent the first 30 plus years of my career in corporate. So I ran large businesses for IBM before going to lead a nonprofit, which it was a startup nonprofit. So it was 5.5 years of working 80 plus hours a week to launch a startup focused on growing the tech economy in Milwaukee. So to your point, the amount of stress, right, that was there was significant. And as you look at the difference with the Camino, it takes away all those layers of stress. And in fact, like I'd even monitor the news while I was there. I was completely disconnected. Your level of stress goes down so significantly. In fact, when I came home, it was difficult for me to handle stress again. And in fact, my son and I laugh about this because he'll rib me, in appropriate ways that a young adult son would rib you. And I was like, I can't do it, right? You cannot do this to me right now, because I had not dealt with a stressful situation for a month. It was very, very different.
Yeah, yeah. And what would you attribute to the Camino? Because on the Camino there are situations, there are challenges too. Is that you, because too many things can happen during the day, and you're gonna be facing uphill, downhill. That are some uphill are very up. You need to walk a lot up or down. So the poles. If it's rain, can be rain a lot, and you don't have anything to cover around because it's just your poncho and your rain jacket. That's it.
Yep.
And all those situations, and you need to take the decision: will I take this route or this other route, this shortcut? So all those situations happen, plus the blisters, plus the pain on the back. But still, the people is so happy. So, but at work, people get so stressed. So, what would you say that is that why?
It's interesting. So, yeah, all the things you talked about. At one point in time, I got lost in the middle of a sunflower field. Literally, I'm like shoulder to shoulder, sunflowers on both sides. I'm like, well, now where do I go? Where I got lost in Burgos, and with limited Spanish skills, I got lost and couldn't find my way back. The only way I knew to get back was 4 more miles back. I'm like, I can't do that from the cathedral. But to your point, it's the funny part for me, was that somebody asked me about my most difficult day on the Camino and when I got back, and none of those situations came to mind. The situation that came to mind was a day that I ended up walking about 10 miles with a man who was very negative towards everything in the world. He was negative towards his church, his job, his ex-spouse, his kids, etc. And I found myself like thinking, I got to turn this guy off. Like, how do I turn this off? It was mentally difficult. And so, one of my reflections coming back that I often talk to is the power of perspective. If you face those challenges with a sense of curiosity and openness and interest of how I'm going to handle this, and gratitude for when I was stuck in Burgos, the multitude of people that were so sweet to me and tried to help me navigate my way. They were all Spanish people, navigate my way back and navigate the bus system back. I was so grateful for that. And what a difference between that and the person who was ungrateful for everything in their lives and how difficult that was on me. So to me, it's all about attitude. And this attitude of gratitude and how different that perspective can be.
Yeah, that's great. What would be your memory, that's something that you recall from that experience of the Camino that you say, I need to tell this to somebody else?
So when I came home, I had to think really quickly about how I was going to describe this experience because I had to go to a conference the very next morning with about 300 people that knew how that I had been on the Camino. And so the best way I could describe it was that it was where the best of humanity shows up. And when that happens, many miracles occur. And it's literally mini miracle after mini miracle. And one of them that when people ask the next question of, well, what does that mean? Like, what's a mini miracle mean? I would tell them the story of Felipe. And Felipe and I met on the Meseta. He was there because his mother, unfortunately, had passed away from lung cancer back in January of that year. And I can tell this story because it's fully documented on the internet. But he, by him, but he told me his story as we walked along. And it was just beautiful. I shared the story of my daughter, and we got to know each other, I don't know, 5-6 miles or so that we walked together. And then we left one another, and over the next several days, we would see each other occasionally, and we'd be just like, you good, and on we went. Well, it was the September 30th, and I wanted to get to O Cebreiro before sunrise because just to see the sunrise come up over the mountain. And as I got to the top, who did I see but Felipe? And Felipe is there sitting on the stone wall, and he waves me over. And I go over, and he says to me, today would have been my mother's 60th birthday. And I have no idea why I did what was next, but I reached into my purse. I had been given at Mass the night before. I had been driven up to Osemburia, a blessed stone that had a arrow on it. And I gave it to Felipe, and I said, I don't know why, but your mother wants you to have this. And at that, he actually told me, he's like, he told me his mother, who had walked the Camino, had that stone. It was one of her more prized possessions from coming back from the Camino. And anyway, we hugged, we cried. And then he told me, he's like, Kathy, you look like my mother, which is kind of funny because he's Brazilian. I'm pretty much of German heritage.
Okay.
But he gets out this video, and sure enough, we actually kind of do, haircut similar, etc. And it was just a beautiful time. And when I talk about the Camino now, I talk about like There was no way I could have planned that interaction. I didn't know Felipe was going to be up there on the top of the mountain. I didn't know about that his mother had had that stone. I had no idea that I looked like his mother. I'm actually the same age as well. And sometimes these small, and for me, it was a blessing for him, but it was equally a blessing for me to be able to be used in that way. So that was a beautiful moment on the Camino.
Yeah, and it's amazing that the Camino is full of plenty of good things that happen all
Yeah.
around all the people that go through it. And that's what I always say, for everyone would be good to do at least one Camino in their life,
Oh, yeah.
because the benefit for the Camino for everybody is amazing. And then we will have a different world.
Yes, it really would. But it's interesting. You go for a reason. And you said this early on. The reason you went, you don't always receive. So, for example, I didn't come home and have my daughter be like, poof, miraculously healed. But I received peace with the situation as we continue to navigate it. And, I have to admit, I did discern quite a bit, but I didn't come back with, poof, here's my answer of what I'm to go do next. Instead, it has become a more gradual process of that evolving and unfolding post the Camino. But there's a trust that that will occur in some way in the nature it is supposed to be. So the gifts that I received of peace and trust, and frankly, a reconnection. I had been, frankly, very sad for many years about my daughter's condition, praying constantly for hers. And to reconnect with fun, fun and joy, and all of those kinds of things is also an important part of the gifts I received from the Camino that I could never have envisioned when I embarked on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and everybody have difficulties through their life, because life is not easy.
Right,
Uh, but there is always good things that you can do to see life in a different way.
right, exactly.
So, and then you have plans to walk other Camino.
I am discerning that. I know I will go back. Which one? The one that's on my list right now is the Croatian.
Okay.
But I have yet to meet anybody that has done the Croatian. So we shall see how that goes.
Okay. So, well, I know with the podcast, I'm having interviewing so many people from different part of the world, and I'm gonna have an interview uh, uh, in the next months, where I'm gonna be interviewing a person from Denmark, and he walked the Camino from Denmark to Santiago. So
Wow.
probably I'm gonna meet someone at some time that has to walk the Croatian Camino. So, and if that happens, I will definitely share with you that video.
Thank you.
Yes. So, and then, so once you return and you tell all the in that conference that you talk about the Camino, and people start asking questions about your experience.
Hmm. Yeah, and in fact, I because there were so many questions, I also spent time just kind of figuring out what I wanted to say about it, both before I came back. I remember I walked around Madrid for half a day and I literally took notes on my phone, like, okay, here's a theme. But I also put together a presentation that I utilize with a number of groups. I've done it with leadership groups, leadership lessons from the Camino, and another one about lessons and blessings of the Camino. That has helped, I think, people understand this. One of the things, though, I'm very cautious of is that everybody's experience is different. And I went to the Camino not wanting to have any expectations. And in fact, I refused to watch The Way. I refused to do any of those because I wanted to go in with an open mind, knowing that my experience would be different. And in fact, some of us were talking about this as we were walking the Camino, about some of the things they had experienced, like somebody had experienced the monks singing and etc. And each of our Camino experiences was different, and each of them were beautiful and perfect for us. And so, that's one warning I have for everyone, is to come into the Camino with an open mind and not any expectations.
Okay, well, thank you. And then we're almost ending the time for today. So, what final advice would you tell someone that is considering to walk their first Camino?
Yeah, don't plan it too much. Leave space for the unexpected. It's good to have a general idea. I went not even knowing that there were mountains I was going to go over, but that's okay. But do your research so that you're prepared mentally, but also leave space for the unexpected.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kathy, for participating here, and thank you to you, pilgrims, for watching us on this episode. And please keep adding your comments on the comment section for talking for the future topics that you would like to see on this channel. Thank you, and buen camino.